Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the MMA Pick'ems podcast, where we'll be breaking down UFC Fight Night, Font versus Aldo. And we have a pretty solid card here coming up. Great main and co-main, a number of prospects I'm excited to watch. Brendan Allen, Jimmy Crute, Jamahal, a few really fun fighters there. And then the rest of the card rounds out. Okay, we have a few veterans in here as well. Overall, looking like a pretty decent card here. Hopefully, it'll turn out a bit better than the previous one, which ended up being one of the more forgettable cards in recent memory here. Fortunate to have come out ahead betting-wise. So with that, we'll just get right into the recap for the previous event here. So kicking off the card, we had Luana Pinheiro, Sam Hughes. I had a small shot here on Sam Hughes. Thought that she'd have a stronger round 2 and round 3, knowing that Pinheiro is someone who has historically been a round 1 finisher, so thought that if the fight got extended, Hughes would have a decent shot of maybe winning the second and third round, but as it turns out, Hughes just really isn't at that level. She's just not quite good enough to really take advantage of the volume fall off for Pinheiro later in the fight. But I do feel that Pinheiro is someone that you could fade going forward against a better fighter, someone who can push the pace a little more, someone who's maybe a little more technical in there. But moving along, Cheyanne, Sean Soriano, ended up taking a small shot on Cheyanne just because, I didn't think that Cheyanne would be good enough to maybe get his grappling going against Soriano, pre-tape or I guess pre-fight, but ended up taking the shot anyways because I just felt that if Cheyanne would survive that first round, he'd have a pretty good chance against Soriano. And, Soriano's takedown defense, defensive grappling is just utter garbage. He's basically the Antonina Shevchenko of the men's featherweight division here. The guy's got nothing off his back. His takedown defense is atrocious. And someone who's as low level of as Cheyanne was able to take him down, I just don't think that he's going to really go far at all in the UFC. I think that if he's still around, I think he's an easy fade next fight, as long as he's going against someone who's got any sort of grappling. So yeah, easy fade on Soriano going forward if he does get another fight in the UFC. But moving along, Cody Durden, Orichilong ended up taking, I did take a shot on Durden here back when he was a pick'em. He ended up kind of edging out the fight with the wrestling like I expected him to. The fight was a bit closer than I expected. He still got it done, but the key here is getting him at around pick'em. I would not have advised taking him at around like minus 150 or minus 160 where he had closed. But yeah, got the job done there in a very close fight. Loma Lupunmi, Lupita Godinez didn't really have any action on this fight. Thought Loma would have a little more success standing, maybe keep the fight standing a little longer. But, the size discrepancy was definitely a concern here, which kept me away from ultimately, placing any sort of bet on her. So going forward, it's going to be tough taking Loma against someone who's going to have the wrestling or the grappling advantage over her and then the size as well. So definitely will have to be wary of that going forward. But moving along, Rafa Garcia, Natan Levy, didn't have any action on this fight. Garcia was able to edge a decision here. Not too much to say here. Levy's still super green. I picked him to win, but I didn't really trust him at, like a decent-sized favorite. So ended up passing on the fight. Wasn't a very eventful fight either. So, not much else to say here. Pat Sabatini, Tucker Lutz. Another fight that I had a little action on Lutz. Expected Lutz to be able to keep the fight standing, do a bit of work on the feet, but Sabatini was more or less able to just kind of wet blanket him. Was a little surprised he was able to have that much success against Lutz, and was also a little surprised that Lutz didn't go to the wrestling a little bit, try and get Sabatini on his back so that, Lutz can get a bit of control time as well. Overall, though, not a bet I, hate too much. Just a little surprised that Sabatini was able to have, that much success. But moving along, Davey Grant, Adrian Yanez. So you had Adrian Yanez in a parlay. I just thought he'd get it done, honestly. I thought he'd either be able to win a pretty comfortable decision or, be able to get the finish on Grant here. And, the fight ended up, being a little closer than I expected. Grant was throwing a lot of volume in there, but ultimately I do feel that Yanez was landing the much cleaner, harder shots. Definitely, I'd say dropped the second round, but, it was pretty close. 30-27 Grant was pretty ridiculous, though. I think Yanez won rounds 1 and 3 pretty clearly, but outside of that, I don't have too much more to add there. Ronnie Yaya, Kyung Ho King, So yeah, I thought this fight would kind of play out a little more like it did in the first round, where King was able to keep the fight standing and just do a bit of work on the feet. Did not expect King to just play off his back for as long as he did, and that pretty much lost him the fight. As soon as Yaya was able to take him down, the round was over because King just did not have any sort of get-ups and was content to, just work off his back, which, just looks terrible. Thought someone of King's caliber would be able to kind of stay defensively sound in there, keep the fight standing enough to win a decision, but apparently not. So moving along, Joan Calderwood, Tyler Santos. Had Santos in this as the second leg of the parlay. Was really tempted to take her submission prop as well, thinking the fight, if it was on the ground for extended periods, that Santos would be able to eventually find the sub. And of course, I do feel that Calderwood is low-key someone who will, give her neck. It's been a few times, she's been in there, gives up the armbar. So I feel like she is someone you could definitely break in there. Did not pull the trigger on that. Ended up just settling, taking her money line on the parlay. And didn't really think Santos would be able to hurt Calderwood like she did. I thought Santos would be able to go to her grappling a little bit more there, but it looked like Santos was comfortable enough on the feet and was actually able to find the chin on Calderwood. So good on Santos there. Definitely looked like the big favorite she was pegged to be. So moving along, Michael Chiesa, Sean Brady. I was on the Brady side pre-fight, but ended up just passing on the fight. Just felt that maybe the experience of Chiesa would potentially get to Brady. But yeah, I probably should have just taken a shot there because I was pretty confident Brady would win. I just didn't know how he'd fare against Chiesa. Big step up in competition. Thought that Chiesa could potentially find the submission there, but I do feel that Brady, being the much bigger, thicker guy, would have a lot of grappling success. Definitely didn't think that Chiesa would be the one coming out ahead on the striking exchanges. Although I did say that Chiesa's striking is actually decent. He just isn't someone who throws that much. But I thought that on the feet, Brady would have a slight edge there, but it looked like Brady was the one who had to resort to the grappling to get it done. But moving along, Ketlen Vieira, Misha Tate. So definitely was on the Tate side pre-fight, but, very low confidence and not a fight I actually had any action on. Overall, just neither fighter really inspired that much confidence. And, like I was saying before with Tate, she looked good against against Renault, but, I don't know if you could really take much from that performance. She was going up against Renault, who honestly looked like she was more concerned about making her post-fight retirement speech than she was about actually winning the fight. And the UFC's out here making documentaries about Misha Tate 2.0 as if Tate didn't just beat up a middle-aged gym teacher. Anyways, it definitely looked like the size and the physicality of Vieira was a little too much for Tate to handle there. And then, Tate definitely starting to show that, maybe the game has passed her by a little bit. I don't think she's going to be able to hang with some of these bigger 135ers, bigger, younger 135ers. So not sure where she's going to go from here. Maybe back to retirement. Who knows? But not the best performance on Vieira's part either. So the vision looking pretty shallow. Not a lot of promise here. So hopefully, we get some prospects coming along. But with that, we just recapped the previous event. Was fortunate to come out, about I think 1.6 units ahead. So happy about that. But without further ado, let's get right into the Font Aldo card. And in the next fight, we have Luis Smolka versus Vince Morales, and Smolka's the minus 135 favorite. Come back on. Morales is plus 115. So we'll take a look at Smolka here first. The guy's a very, I think, decently well-rounded fighter. I'd kind of classify him as a bit of a veteran gatekeeper sort of fighter. He's going to beat guys who I think are either lower UFC caliber or maybe not UFC caliber at all, but will struggle against guys who are ranked or like fringe ranked fighters. So, decent fighter in Smolka. I'd say he's got decent boxing, decent output, will move forward. Is kind of hittable though, but, he is pretty durable. So, he can definitely take the damage. And, he's got a pretty solid grappling game as well. His submission defense is a little suspect, though. He's got a ton of submission losses. And Smolka, he is someone who will flop to his back sometimes. He gets a little comfortable with his ground game. But, overall, I do think he's a pretty well-rounded fighter. His opponent, Morales, primarily a striker. He's got good movement on the feet. Someone who does have good volume, but doesn't seem to pack a lot of power in his shots. We have seen him struggle a bit with the low leg kicks. Benito was having a lot of success there. And then, of course, he gets finished via leg kicks by Gutierrez. So, I do think that's a very big hole in his game. Overall, I just don't think that Morales is that good, honestly. I think he's super one-dimensional. He supposedly can wrestle, but we have yet to see it in the UFC. So for that reason, I do have to go with Smolka here. I just think that, for one, I really don't think Morales is that good. And Smolka, while I'm not super high on him either, he's got way more UFC experience. And, he's actually been in there with names. A lot of the guys he's losing to are definitely on the higher end of the UFC. Casey Kenny, I think, top 15 guy. Matt Schnell, I believe top 15 also. Mateus Nicolau, top 10 guy. Tim Elliott, longtime vet, and I believe was ranked at the time. Ray Borg, who, is a tough matchup for anyone. Very smothering, very, wrestle-heavy guy. And then Brandon Moreno, the current champ. So, Smolka's, he's losing to some really solid guys in there, and then he's beating guys who are, just lower-level UFC guys. And I definitely would classify Morales as like a lower-level guy. I don't know if he's really UFC caliber because, you look at some of the guys he's beating in there, Draco Rodriguez, Ayman Zahabi, very low-level guys in there, and he's got losses to, I'd say, some decent fighters, but, in the fights that he has won, it's not like he's really blown them out of the water either. So I think this is a pretty favorable matchup here for Smolka. I definitely think that he should maybe be a bigger favorite here. Honestly, not too in-depth of a breakdown. I just think that this is potentially a levels fight. I know Smolka's not really the best, but he really just is able to do work on these guys who aren't really UFC caliber, and I really just think that's the case for Morales. On the feet, maybe, I could give Morales a slight edge here, but I don't even think that's the case. I honestly just think that Smolka's a little bit better everywhere. I think if he takes this fight to the ground, he could potentially get the submission. On the feet, I really like the body work and the attritional damage that Smolka gives. And, Smolka is pretty durable himself, so I don't know if Morales is going to find the finish. I just think that Smolka should be a decent-sized favorite here, actually. I think he can get it done whichever way possible. So I'm going to go with Smolka. I think he could get it done via decision, but I wouldn't be surprised if he found the finish here too. Smolka, he's got a good submission game, and he does have a bit of power too. So I can honestly see Smolka getting it done in any way here. So I'm just going to go with Smolka to win the fight straight up. And in the next fight, we have Alex Morono versus Mickey Gall, and Morono's the minus 210 favorite. Come back on Gall is plus 180. So very interesting matchup to say the least here. Morono, very solid, well-rounded fighter. Someone who I'd consider a decent gatekeeper level fighter at this point. He's actually been in the UFC for quite a while now, so he's been getting a lot of UFC experience. Hasn't really beaten anyone of note. I know he's coming off of a win against Cerrone, but this is the ghost of Cerrone we're talking about, and Cerrone has historically been a 155er, but Morono's definitely gotten his reps in at the UFC level. I do feel he is someone who is, a bit of like a UFC level gatekeeper. Anyone that isn't quite UFC caliber, he's probably going to beat. And then when he does get a step up in competition against guys who are, maybe top 20, top 25 guys, he will struggle a little bit. But overall, I do feel we have a pretty good sense of where Morono stands in the division. Whereas with his opponent, Mickey Gall, a little harder to get a read on. The guy I feel is still a bit green. Honestly, I do think that Gall's a bit of a meme fighter, but it's just so hard to get a read on him because he hasn't really fought all that much. And in the fights that he does win, he usually wins pretty early and pretty spectacularly, but he does have a few losses on his record that are definitely head scratchers. For one, 2020 Mike Perry, which, Mike Perry at that point had, I think, regressed pretty significantly. But that fight was actually, somewhat close. And then, of course, he loses to Diego Sanchez, which, Diego Sanchez in 2019, definitely a head scratcher there and not a good look whatsoever. And then Randy Brown, pretty early in his career still. But, this is a Randy Brown who I think is a pretty solid fighter. So overall, not too bad when it comes to the losses outside of maybe the Diego Sanchez loss. The Mike Perry loss, was bad, but, I don't think it was terrible. And then when he does win, he's usually beaten these lower level guys, Jordan Williams, Salim Tuhari, George Sullivan, CM Punk. So yeah, not like super high level guys he's beaten in there, but he is usually able to beat them pretty quickly. So, really hard to get a read on Gall here for that reason. And of course, Gall is still really young in his career, so he definitely can be making improvements. But as far as what he brings to the table, the guy's got a solid jiu-jitsu base. His striking seems like it's coming along a little bit, but it's hard to say. I mean, he was able to hurt Williams early in that fight, so it's really hard to say, if he's really made that many improvements in his striking. So for me, it's hard to really confidently take a side here, given just the amount of unknowns around Gall. But, I definitely do have to default towards the Morono side. He's, a little more proven at the UFC level. He's a very well-rounded fighter. He's generally pretty tough. He's got decent striking. He's got decent cardio, decent durability. And overall, it's just kind of hard to look good against Morono unless you're Chaos Williams and you just start him early. But, generally his fights are pretty competitive. So, yeah, I definitely am on the side of Morono here. It's just I don't know if I could really get past that price tag. Gall, I think, despite being a bit of a meme fighter, does have a few redeeming traits. He is someone who, can make a fight dirty. He is generally pretty tough. And he does have a decent submission game as well. And then, of course, he's still pretty young, so I don't know what kind of improvements he'll be making. So while I do favor Morono to win here, I just don't think that he should be this big of a favorite. Can't believe I'm actually saying this, but I do think that Gall might be the value side here. But I just don't know if I could bring myself to betting him just yet. I think that this might just be a good fight to sit back and see where the development's going with him. But, I do think that Morono should be able to get out a decision here. I think that the striking of Morono should be better, and I do think that if he is able to keep this fight standing, he should be able to get the better of Gall in most of these exchanges. So I'm going to go with Morono here to win via decision. And moving along, we have Jared Vanderaa versus Azamat Murzakanov. So this fight actually just got announced here, was literally just about finished wrapping up this podcast. But, saw the fight announcement. So I didn't do too deep of a dive onto Vanderaa, but, he fought pretty recently. I do remember what he brings to the table, and I do have some notes on him. So I'll just give my thoughts on this fight. But, just based off of what I've seen from Vanderaa, he's a big, plotty sort of heavyweight. Really great at abusing his size, working the clinch, using his grappling. And then we did see him, go to his boxing quite a bit against Tafa and was actually able to out-volume Tafa and just kind of touch up Tafa that fight. So Vanderaa definitely looking like a pretty well-rounded lower-level heavyweight. But, the guy's got really shoddy takedown defense. His ground game's pretty awful. And, cardio is a bit suspect. Both of his losses in the UFC are by guys who were able to basically just top control him and pound him out. Honestly, a pretty low-level sort of guy, but I do think that if he's not getting matched up with grapple-heavy fighters, he should have a bit of success. His opponent, Azamat Murzakanov, he's historically been a light heavyweight. The guy is someone who moves pretty well on the feet, especially for his size and stature. He's great at bouncing in and out of the pocket. He's got pretty decent, quick hands. Seems to pack a bit of a punch as well, at least on the regionals. But, he has had an issue with, I think, lower volume. He looks to just kind of feint his way in. And, he's not just doing too much, just looking for the perfect shot. But, again, he is very powerful and he can put a lot of his opponents out. Does look like he's got a pretty strong top game as well. Haven't seen him go to it extensively, but it looks like he is someone who will occasionally just like time a level change, shoot a blast double, and just look to maybe pound his opponents out on top. But again, very low level guys, and I don't think he's a hyper aggressive wrestler grappler type. He's beaten a few names on the regionals, but outside of that, I feel like he's primarily beaten a bunch of lower level guys. That said, though, he definitely does seem kind of dangerous in there, whether it's on the feet or on the ground. That said, though, he is going to be making his UFC debut, and this is going to be a fight that's at heavyweight. He was initially slated to go up against Lins at light heavyweight. Lins pulls out, and in steps Vanderaa, who's a natural heavyweight. So this is going to be a very interesting fight for Azamat. And there hasn't actually been a line for this fight yet, but I don't think I can make Azamat too big of a favorite here, namely because of the the size discrepancy. Maybe Azamat's able to just come in there and starch Vanderaa, but I don't know if that's too likely. I don't even know if Azamat's going to be able to consistently hit takedowns on Vanderaa and hold him down, just because there's going to be just such a big size advantage. Vanderaa is probably going to have 50 plus pounds on Azamat, and then I think he's going to have a pretty big size and reach, or height and reach advantage over Azamat as well. So I think this is going to be a pretty tough fight for Azamat, but I don't know if I could make him, or I don't know if I can make Vanderaa a favorite in this matchup, just as I do feel that, skill-wise, Azamat's probably the better fighter, but I do think that the size advantage for Vanderaa is going to be pretty significant. So, if I had to line this fight, I'd probably make Azamat maybe like minus 150 favorite at the most, just because I think his path to victory is likely just an early knockout. I don't know if his wrestling is going to be on point enough. He's going to be able to take down Vanderaa for 2 out of the 3 rounds and control him for those 2 or 3 rounds. Vanderaa, like I said before, very natural heavyweight. I think that if anything, we could see Vanderaa go to the wrestling a bit, look to just push Azamat up against the cage, control him there, look to dirty box, and really use his size advantage. So for that reason, I really can't make Azamat that big of a favorite. Honestly, if I had to truly line this line, I'd put it at near a pick'em. I don't really think Vanderaa is all that good, but I do think the size advantage is a huge factor in this fight. So pure pick, I guess I have to go with Azamat. The guy looks pretty dangerous, looks like a solid fighter, and definitely looks like the more skilled fighter out of the two. But I just have a hard time seeing him starching Vanderaa. Vanderaa, very tough guy. Both of his losses in the UFC are by TKO, but both of those stoppages were because, he's facing much bigger opponents who are better grapplers, who are able to just pin him to the ground and just unload on him on top. Like, the guy wasn't out cold or anything. It was more of like a mercy stoppage, from taking too much damage. Not because, he's got a bad chin or anything. So I think that if Azamat isn't able to knock out Vanderaa, this fight could get very dicey. I think that if Vanderaa is too big of a dog here, I might have to take a shot on him. I just think that Vanderaa can probably, do a little more at range, honestly, and maybe even go to the wrestling a little bit and look to stall out the fight that way if the fight's not going his way on the feet. But I honestly don't even think Azamat's going to be completely blowing Vanderaa out of the water. So as an official pick, I think I'm actually going to switch sides there mid-podcast and go with Vanderaa. As I'm saying this out loud, it definitely feels like Vanderaa should be favored because mainly because of the size. I really don't think he's like a terrible fighter. I think that if Azamat doesn't go to the wrestling, this should be a pretty close fight. So I'm actually going to go with Vanderaa here as my official pick. And moving along, we have Claudio Puelles versus Chris Gruetzemacher, and Gruetzemacher's the minus 135 favorite. Comeback on Puelles is plus 115. And we'll start with Puelles first. So, not super high on this guy. I think he's pretty low level. Has not looked great at all in the UFC. He's someone who I would consider just like a wet blanket sort of fighter, someone who is, very control-oriented, not very high action, pretty low pace, just looking to hold his opponents down and, get a ton of control time on them. Striking, pretty non-existent. He's extremely hittable on the feet. But he is someone who is pretty reliable to go to his grappling, either hold his opponents off the cage, just hang off of them, just rack up control time. Very boring fighter to watch if I'm being honest, but it is pretty effective. On top, he does stay pretty heavy, and he does a pretty decent job of floating on top and just maintaining position and doing just enough so the refs don't break him apart. So, he fights to that game plan pretty well and has been able to go 3-1 in the UFC. But honestly, he hasn't really fought anyone of note. But again, he is very consistent in the octagon. I'll give him that at least. He's going to look to implement his game plan and just look to grind out his opponents. And taking a look at his opponent, Gruetzemacher, consider Grits pressure sort of fighter, likes to move forward and just throw volume. Not the most technical or defensively sound in there, but, he is tough. He has good cardio, good conditioning, and generally he'll just kind of move forward, look to overwhelm his opponents with the pressure and pace that he brings. The issue with him, though, is, one, he is a little older. I don't think he's a phenomenal athlete or anything. He is someone who's just very tough, very gritty in there. And, his takedown defense is pretty bad too. He is someone who will get stuck off his back. And, he is someone who I think has pretty bad submission defense. I know he's fought some pretty good grapplers in there, but the way in which they just took his back and how quickly he tapped was very concerning, even against higher level grapplers. I just don't like how quickly Gruetzemacher tapped in there. But taking a look at this matchup, I definitely do think that Puelles is the side here. Again, I'm not super high on Puelles, but stylistically, I do think this is a somewhat favorable matchup for him. Puelles is someone who is very consistent with his game plan. You can trust him to just go in there, look to spam takedowns, look to push his opponents up against the cage, maybe get a bit of control time, stay on top of him, and just win a very boring control-based decision. And I do feel that, Grits being someone who likes to move forward and pressure his opponents, I do think the best way to really neutralize that is to get him to the ground and prevent him from getting off on his strikes, making him really work to use his energy to get back to his feet, get off his back, as opposed to just moving forward and throwing volume. So stylistically, I do feel that Puelles should have the advantage here. But again, Puelles, I think, is going to be at a disadvantage on the feet. I think he's very hittable, and I do think that, if Gruetzemacher is able to keep it standing, he should win the decision, but I just don't trust Grits to really be able to keep the fight standing. Gruetzemacher's takedown defense isn't great. His get-ups aren't particularly great either. He got up a number of times against Garcia, but Rafa Garcia is, I think, a bum, and he's got terrible top control time. Levy was able to get up multiple times against Garcia. So I just feel that Puelles is going to be the better grappler than Gruetzemacher, and I think that if Puelles is able to get Gruetzemacher down, he should be able to control him for, I think, maybe 3 or 4 minutes there. And I do think that the longer the fight goes, the more it should favor Puelles. I think that especially if Puelles is able to get his grappling going, he should be able to start to drain the cardio of Gruetzemacher a bit, because while I did say that Gruetzemacher's got, decent cardio and output, he is getting a bit older, and I don't think that Gruetzemacher can really push like a high grappling pace. And I just think that Puelles, he's just much better on the ground, honestly. And with how shoddy Gruetzemacher's takedown defense and submission defenses, I feel that if Puelles is able to, aggressively go for the takedowns, hunt the submissions, he could potentially find it. Because I do think that Gruetzemacher is someone who will look for a way out, in these prolonged grappling exchanges. And I did mention it a little bit earlier in this breakdown, but in this fight against Ramos and Skelly, Gruetzemacher had his back taken pretty quickly, and as soon as they locked in that rear naked choke, he just tapped. Didn't really try to fight the hands or anything. It just looked like as soon as they locked in the submission, he wanted out. And I feel that if Puelles attacked the submissions here, he could potentially find the sub. But, Puelles not exactly a submission expert, and historically he has been someone who's a bit more control-oriented. So I do think that Puelles should be able to grind out a decision, but I do think that the submission might be live as well for Puelles. But ultimately, I will take Puelles to win by decision here. And moving along, we have Alonzo Menifield versus William Knight. Menifield's going to be the minus 175 favorite. Come back on Knight is plus 150. And honestly, not a fight I'm going to spend too much time on. I broke this fight down a little while ago. Back when this fight was actually at a pick'em, I was all over Menifield in that fight, and now it looks like they've adjusted the lines accordingly. But look, these guys were originally scheduled to fight a few times actually, but taking a look at the matchup, Menifield, pretty one-dimensional fighter. He's got big power on the feet. He is a bit knockout or bust. Historically, he has been someone who gets a lot of early finishes and then slows down quite a bit after that first round. He does have a couple round 2 finishes, but those are pretty early in the second round. And, should he get extended, he has shown that he will slow down pretty significantly. He is coming off of a decision victory over Herman, but that fight was actually, somewhat close. And, against Ed Herman, I don't think that was a particularly great look. I think he just did a little too much damage on Herman early, and Herman wasn't able to fully recover and do too much later in the fight. But that fight was actually, somewhat close, all things considered. And it wasn't even like a super high output sort of fight either. It didn't look like Herman really wanted to commit to anything because Menifield was just hurting him too much, was coming back with too much power. So Herman never really fully committed, never really pushed the pace, and Menifield was able to win a pretty low pace sort of decision there. But I'm not completely sold on the cardio of Menifield at all. I do think that, he still is, early knockout or bust. Whereas his opponent, Knight, is, he's more of a grinder, in my opinion, someone who will look to kind of stall fights out, push his opponents up against the cage or just take him down and look to just win on a volume-based or a control-based decision. I don't think his striking is really all that good. He does seem to pack a bit of power, but, I think he's honestly a bit stiff on the feet. We did see Zhang just take Knight down on a consistent basis, using the same trip over and over and just dominate him on top. So while Knight may be good on top, while he's the one in the control position, if you are able to get him to his back, he's not really good there. So, I really don't think too highly of either fighter. I was on the Menifield side before when it was a pick'em. I just felt that Menifield, much better striker in there. I think he's got a bit more power, and I do think that, Menifield's got solid takedown defense as well. So I don't know if Knight's going to be able to get too much control time on Menifield, and while it is at distance, I do favor Menifield. So for that reason, I'm going to pick Menifield to win. I think he is definitely live for the knockout early, and I do think that if this fight somehow gets extended, he could potentially win a decision as well, just, being able to land some of the harder shots. Not going to completely count Knight out here because, Knight is an absolute tank of a man, and he's got some power in his hands too, so there's definitely a possibility that he could knock Menifield out. And, maybe he is able to kind of just wall install his way to a victory here too. But there's no way I'm betting Menifield at minus 170. Back when it was a pick'em, I could see there being a bit of value, but as it stands now, no value on either side really. Maybe the Knight side, but plus 140 is not like nothing crazy here for a pretty low level fighter. So I'm going to go with Menifield here. I think that he should be able to get a knockout maybe, but he has shown that if he could stretch the fight out against some of these lower level guys, he could probably win a very close decision. So I'll go with Menifield here, but not like super confident, especially at this price. And in the next fight, we have Mallory Martin versus Cheyanne Vlismas, formerly Bays. Not quite sure what happened there, but maybe after she got that head kick knockout, probably thought that she could do better than JP. I mean, she is 1-1 now, so she can't be caught married to some 0-2 bum. Anyways, back to this matchup. Vlismas is going to be the minus 180 favorite. Comeback on Martin is plus 155. And we'll take a look at Martin first. So, Martin, primarily a wrestler. Her boxing isn't particularly great. It's very basic, and she is very hittable on the feet. But, she is somewhat reliable to go to her wrestling. She's got a decent top game. Nothing crazy there, though. She's not a vicious top player. Not like very damaging on top either. And honestly, not much of a submission threat. I know she did get a sub over Cyphers, but not one I rate too highly. I think that Martin's a decent fighter, I guess. Not super highly skilled anywhere, but she is somewhat reliable to hit takedowns, get a bit of control time, and win that way. On the feet, though, she's just extremely hittable, and I do think that her striking's a bit of a liability. Her opponent, Vlismas, I'd consider her primarily to be a striker. She's very aggressive in there. We'll move forward. We'll throw some, 3-4 punch combinations. Has shown that she could hit some takedowns as well, get a bit of control time, but it does look like her preferred method is to just look to box with her opponents. Her takedown defense actually didn't look too bad against Rose, but I think we all remember Ruiz just hitting the same head and arm throw on Vlismas and just getting a ton of control time and winning because of that. So while that might be an anomaly performance, it's definitely one that can't be forgotten easily, especially how hilarious it was. But, on the feet for this matchup, I do favor Bays a lot more here, or Vlismas here a lot more. I just think that she's going to be much more aggressive there. And Martin, just very hittable, man. I think that Vlismas is going to be able to just tee off on Martin if this is going to be on the feet. But I do expect Martin to look to hit takedowns here. That said, though, Martin, while she is primarily a wrestler, she hasn't really had a ton of wrestling success at the UFC level. She was controlled quite a bit by Jandaroba before getting submitted. Was able to choke out Cyphers, but Cyphers was winning pretty clearly in that first round. But knowing Cyphers has a habit of just kind of losing these fights, so good on Martin for being able to come back from that, but not a win I rate too highly, considering it is Cyphers, who's basically a walking choke job. And Martin then goes on to face Viana, where she was able to take Viana down, which not really super impressive, because it did look like Viana went and just wanted to pull guard. And eventually, Viana was able to find the armbar. So the submission defense of Martin, definitely a little suspect, even though it was against pretty high-level submission grapplers. And I guess the good news here is that Vlismas is not exactly a submission artist. So Mallory really going to have to rely on her grappling, wrestling to win this fight. Because on the feet, I do think that she gets touched up pretty badly. That said, Vlismas could probably hit some offensive takedowns as well, but I just don't really rate her wrestling and grappling game all that highly. But as far as a pure pick goes, I think I'm going to have to go with Vlismas. I think that she's got a pretty sizable advantage on the feet. And if she is able to keep this fight standing, I think she can win pretty decisively. But I do think that Martin might be able to hit some takedowns here and make this fight much closer than it should be. I definitely do feel the value side here is going to be Martin. I think that if Martin is able to hit a couple takedowns, it could be a real game changer, make this fight much closer than it is. Could definitely steal a couple of rounds if she is able to hit a couple takedowns. But, the issue with Martin is, again, she's not super reliant to go to the takedowns. She will, fight on the feet a little longer than she should. And it's not like she's a super dominant wrestler either. Like, who is she really, look good against at the UFC level, right? I mean, she's really only had 3 UFC fights, right? Lost 2 of them. So, not exactly the most inspiring, but I do think that there is a path to victory here for Martin. So I wouldn't really recommend laying the juice here on Vlismas. I do think that if I were to bet a side, it'd probably be Martin. I think this fight could end up being pretty close as long as Martin comes in with the proper game plan. But I think I will have to just side with Vlismas as a pure pick, but I just don't think she should be this big of a favorite, especially after her Ruiz performance, where she was able to just get taken down over and over by the same throw and just get controlled there for 3+ minutes each round. So the pick is going to be Vlismas, but I might actually put a small bet on Martin to win by decision or something. So the pick is Vlismas, but I'll probably end up betting Martin. And in the next fight, we have Zhalgas Zhumagulov versus Manel Kape. And Kape's the -200 favorite. Come back on Zhumagulov is +170. So, yeah, a very interesting matchup here. 2 guys who I think have had pretty disappointing UFC runs. I'd say 2 guys were somewhat highly touted. I'd say more so Kape, but both guys have kind of dropped the ball a bit in their UFC runs. But taking a look at Zhalgas first, he's a somewhat well-rounded fighter. I do consider him more of a striker. Can definitely wrestle a little bit, but does most of his work on the feet. He is someone who will look to kind of blitz into the pocket, throw a few combinations, but generally, he is on the back foot and is looking to counter, which, I'm not a big fan of. He's got a very bad habit of getting backed up, and this just leads to very close fights because, he's going to be looking for the counter, and so, a lot of the times he just ends up coming out of these exchanges even, and it just doesn't really look good on the scorecards when he's backing up most of the fight. And I just feel that overall his style doesn't really work that well, since I feel a lot of fighters are able to beat him to the punch. So a lot of the times, he's just barely coming out evens. And to top it off, I think his takedown defense isn't particularly great. So, striking exchanges come out pretty even, and opponents are able to take him down and look to just close rounds out with the takedowns and steal rounds that way. And I feel he was able to kind of get away with it a bit on the regionals, but now that he's in the UFC, I don't know if he's going to be able to fight his style and have too much success. And he'll be going up against Kape, who is a pretty good striker himself. He's very sharp in there, very quick hands. Not someone who's I'd consider a very big hitter, but he does have good precision and good timing. The issue with him, though, is going to be the output, obviously. In both of his UFC fights, he struggled a bit with just getting off on his shots. Although, he did pick it up a bit against Nicolau, And then even against Osborne, it was a pretty low output affair until the knockout. So that's going to be the big issue with Kape. It's just he doesn't really throw all that much, but he is pretty effective when he is throwing and moving forward. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think that Kape is going to be the much better striker than Zhalgas. Zhalgas, I think, is a super basic striker, very basic, and I do feel overall his striking is pretty one-dimensional. I think Kape's striking is much more technical, much sharper. I think that Kape's just going to be much quicker in there, and overall I just think Kape's going to be the better athlete as well. And on top of that, I feel Kape's fought the higher level of competition. We go over some of the guys that Zhalgas has been in there with. Paiva, who I think was ranked at the time, but I don't really think Paiva's any good. I think he's kind of fraudulent, honestly. And then Albazi, who is looking like a decent prospect, but was super green in that fight. And then Rivera, who is not UFC caliber whatsoever. A guy who's pretty much been finished in all of his fights. So I think that Zhumagulov's faced, low level to fringe UFC level guys. Whereas Kape, he's been in there with Pantoja, Nicolau, who, both guys, I think top 10, top 15 level, arguably could have won the Nicolau fight, and then goes in there and finishes Osborne, who I think is like fringe UFC caliber. So I do feel that Kape has fought the better guys in there, whereas Zhumagulov, he's fighting very competitively against lower level guys. But ultimately for this matchup, I just think that Kape's got Zhumagulov outgunned on the feet, and I do think that this is going to be a striking affair. But the reason I say that is just because I feel that Kape obviously does have the volume issues, but if we take a look at some of his fights, the real issues we saw, in regards to the volume was in his fight against Pantoja, where he didn't really want to throw. It was his UFC debut against a top 5 guy, potential title challenger in Pantoja. Pantoja throws heat in there, and Kape probably just wanted to play it a little safe, didn't want to overextend, in his UFC debut, and so yeah, it was a little low volume in that fight. And then the Nicolau fight, he definitely picked it up a lot more. Still struggled with it a little bit, but we did see him pick up the volume a bit, and he arguably could have won that fight, should have won that fight. I believe all the media members scored it for him. So yeah, that was a close fight there. And then the Osborne fight, which was kind of low volume as well, but he ended up getting the knockout. But the main thing I think I want to point out in regards to those fights is that Kape, he was fighting some pretty heavy hitters in Pantoja and Osborne, and I think he was a little tentative in that fight. I do feel Kape is someone who likes to fight pretty in there. He's not someone who will look to get into wild exchanges. He's not someone who will look to overextend. He does fight pretty measured in there, and it's kind of hard to do that against heavier hitters like Pantoja and Osborne. But I do feel this is a pretty favorable matchup for Kape in the sense that Zhumagulov's not really a heavy hitter. He's someone who is more of a volume-based fighter, and I think we'll kind of play into the style of Kape a little bit. I think Kape will be able to let his hands go a little more in this fight without, worry of getting, clipped hard, getting caught with a bomb or something. And I just feel that Zhumagulov is honestly a bit slow in there. I think that if Zhumagulov is looking to lead, I think that Kape can potentially hit Zhumagulov with the counters. I think that if Kape's leading, I do think that Kape should be able to land first on Zhumagulov, maybe just hit him a little harder, a little cleaner. So I do think that in most of these striking exchanges, Kape should come out ahead. But again, the volume issues are definitely still there. But I just feel that against a lesser striker in Zhumagulov, it shouldn't be too big of an issue. I think that the technical and the speed advantage for Kape should be able to overcome that. Honestly, I think the bigger concern for me in this fight would maybe just be the wrestling of Zhumagulov. If he's able to mix it in, he could have a bit of success here. But I really don't think Zhumagulov's a fantastic wrestler, and we have seen Kape do well against wrestler grapplers in Nicolau in his most recent fight. So I think Kape has Zhumagulov covered here. I know the line probably seems a little wide, and the fight might actually play out kind of close, but I do feel that Kape should win at a pretty high clip here, even if the fight does play out close. I do think he should be coming out ahead in most of these striking exchanges. So I do have Kape winning here. I think he wins a pretty close but clear decision. And moving right along, we have Jake Matthews versus Jeremiah Wells. And Matthews is the minus 185 favorite. Comeback on Wells is plus 160. So we'll take a look at Wells first. The guy's a big action fighter on the feet. He's very heavy-handed, very explosive strikes, very big power. Can definitely get a little wild and off balance when he is moving forward and throwing his strikes. He's got some grappling as well. He's someone who, will kind of just lay on his opponents, a bit of a lay and pray wall install sort of guy. He's very big and strong, so he's able to kind of just wet blanket them a bit. Reminds me a little bit of the Dalcha, big and explosive on the feet, very dangerous. And then if that's not going his way, he could definitely just kind of just lay on his opponents and, just stall the fight out that way. I don't think he's particularly great on top, but, he is someone who will stay somewhat busy and look to just lay a bit of ground and pound and just create openings for the sub. Overall, I do think he's a pretty dangerous fighter. I just don't think he's really all that skilled. I think his cardio is a little suspect as well. And, he's a little KO reliant, but, if that doesn't materialize, he is someone who will kind of just grind his way to a victory. His opponent, Jake Matthews, pretty decent, well-rounded fighter. Hasn't really fought or beat anyone of note. He's been in the UFC for quite a while, actually. He's got good offensive striking. He can wrestle a bit. And he's got solid jiu-jitsu. I think he's had like 15 UFC fights, but really outside of his win against Li Jingliang, he hasn't really beaten anyone of note. It's honestly kind of crazy how many non-UFC caliber fighters he's beaten so far. He's gotten really soft matchmaking up until this point. Definitely seems to struggle a bit when he gets a step up in competition. But overall, I do still think he's a pretty decent fighter who's pretty well-rounded. But taking a look at this matchup, I do feel that Matthews probably is the more technical striker. He's a little tighter with the striking. Definitely more well-rounded. But the power of Wells definitely is going to be an equalizer. And I do think that should this fight get to the ground, Wells might be able to get a bit of top control time. Matthews is someone who I have seen stuck off his back and, spend a little too much time there. I'm not super high on Wells, but, I definitely see paths to victory here for him. He could definitely catch Matthews on the feet and then maybe get some top control time as well. That said, though, Wells hasn't really, beaten the best fighters either, and he is actually a little older. I do believe he's 35, and he's making his this is going to be a second UFC fight. At 35, I just think it's a little late in his career. So as far as the pick goes, I am going to have to go with Matthews here. I just think he's a little more proven, a little more well-rounded. I think he's going to have a bit more minute winning capability, whereas with Wells, he's a little reliant to hit that big shot on the feet, and if that doesn't materialize or if he isn't able to get the fight to the ground, he can struggle a bit. He will be, a little low volume, if he isn't able to land that bomb on his opponent. That said, though, I definitely don't recommend laying the juice on Matthews here. This is a fight that Matthews really should win. He's made his career beating these lower level guys, guys that aren't quite UFC caliber. So this is really a fight that Matthews should win, but I just see far too many paths to victory here for Wells. Wells, of course, can just land that big shot on Matthews, and then, he could probably get some control time on Matthews as well if he decides to go with the grappling. But, again, with Wells, he hasn't really beaten the best guys either. He's primarily just beaten low-level guys on the regionals, so not really sure how that's going to translate over to the UFC. So for that reason, I definitely have to go with Matthews here, but, not super confident. Matthews, pretty unreliable fighter. But, Matthews is also going to be the younger fighter here with more UFC experience. So for that reason, I'm going to have to side with Matthews. Just wouldn't really recommend laying the chalk on him. And moving along, we have a great fight between two of the more unreliable fighters in the division, Maki Pitolo and Duško Todorović. So Todorović is going to be the minus 170 favorite. Come back on. Pitolo is plus 145. So we'll take a look at Pitolo first. The guy's primarily a boxer. Did see him go to his wrestling a bit in his most recent fight against Marquez. But for the most part, the guy is more of a striker, more of a boxer. He's got good volume, good combination punching. But, for someone with the nickname Coconut Bombs, the guy is surprisingly pillow-fisted. Don't think he's gotten any knockouts in the UFC aside from his win against Charles Byrd, who I believe was his retirement fight. The guy's been knocked out quite a bit before, so I actually don't think that Pitolo's got that much power at the UFC level, but he's got, decent output and decent volume in there. And again, he did show he could mix in the wrestling a bit, went to a really wrestle-heavy game plan against Marquez. The top control wasn't particularly great, but, he was hitting takedowns and was actually on his way to winning that fight had he not got caught in that submission in the last minute. The issues with Pitolo, though, takedown defense. Defensive grappling doesn't really look that good. He's been taken down. He's been controlled. Should not have lost his fight against Callum Potter, but, Potter was able to just repeatedly take him down and hold him down. So that's the fight on that basis. So definitely a concern here for Pitolo. And, outside of that fight, we haven't really seen it tested much, so I'm not certain that he's really shored that up either. So big concern there. And then, of course, with Pitolo, he just somehow finds a way to lose, man. The guy's only gotten one win in the UFC. He's on a 3-fight losing skid. A little surprised he's still around, but, I guess he is a pretty fun, exciting fighter to watch. Fortunately for him, though, he'll be going up against another really unreliable fighter in Todorović. And Todorović, honestly, is straight up an idiot. The guy's repeatedly made the same mistakes in all of his UFC fights. He's a decent offensive striker, but he relies a bit too much on his head movement, and he gets touched up a lot, which makes fights much closer than they should, and have honestly just lost him fights. Take, for example, his fight against Teddy Ash in his or not his debut, but the Contender Series, where Ash was able to more or less just touch up Todorović. Todorović relying heavily on that head movement, and really what won him the fight was his clinch game, his grappling a bit. Was able to barely get by against a guy he was a sizable favorite against, and then he comes back into the UFC and gets matched up with Soriano. Does this exact same thing. Gets bombs repeatedly landed on him by Soriano. Gets dropped a couple of times, and eventually gets put out. He wasn't out cold. It was a TKO stoppage, but the amount of bombs he was eating and the amount of times he was dropped, the ref did have to stop that fight. And then he gets matched up with Rodriguez and does the exact same shit. Relies really heavily on that head movement. Still getting touched up, but has made zero adjustments to his game. He did look like he was trying to get to the clinch game and the grappling a little bit, but Rodriguez was able to shuck off most of those attempts and just kind of piece him up at distance. So Todorović, definitely one of these guys with pretty low fight IQ for sure. I will have to admit, though, the guy is pretty durable. He will move forward, and despite the damage he's taken, he'll still continue to throw volume. And even in the Soriano fight, where he was knocked down a couple of times, he wasn't out cold. He was actually on a single when the ref called off the fight, and he was able to go the distance against Rodriguez, who, as it turns out, does seem to have pretty heavy hands as well. So definitely a tough guy, but, does take a lot of damage and leads to fights being just much closer than they should be with how hittable he is. So, yeah, this is actually a pretty tough fight to call just because both guys are extremely unreliable. With Pitolo, the guy I think is low-key a gasser. The guy has a habit of just losing fights. And with Todorović, the guy's extremely hittable, so that's just the greatest equalizer, honestly. But, as far as how it's going to play out on the feet, I think it should be pretty even. Both guys, or Todorović should have like a bit of a size advantage, but I think that Pitolo's going to be a bit quicker in there. I think that his volume and combination punching is probably going to be able to get through to Todorović, especially with how porous Todorović's defensive striking is. I think the big factor here for Todorović is if he decides to look to wrestle or grapple, because he's going to have a pretty decent size advantage over Pitolo, and Pitolo's got pretty shoddy takedown defense. I think that if he's hitting offensive takedowns or, working in the clinch, he could win a pretty grindy decision. But, I was saying that his last two fights, and Todorović didn't really go to that, so you can't rely on that guy to go to his wrestling or grappling at all. Whereas, at least with Pitolo, back against the wall in his most recent fight against Marquez, he was able to aggressively go for the takedowns, and honestly was on his way to winning that fight. So I feel that Pitolo might be a little more reliable to grapple here, but, he's not really like a great wrestler or grappler, and, he's not great like on top or anything. I think those grappling exchanges might have just gassed Pitolo out a bit quicker, led him to, leave openings for the submission. But Todorović, not exactly a submission artist, so this is a very close fight. I think both guys could probably hit takedowns. I think on the feet it should be pretty close, so for that reason, I think I might just side with Pitolo here, especially with him being a dog. Not sure if I could bring myself to bet him, even though I do feel he's probably the value side. I have a feeling if I take Pitolo here, we're going to see a brand new Todorović, short up his defense, go to the grappling, and just win like a pretty greasy, grindy sort of fight. But, as far as just pre-fight, I think that the value side is probably Pitolo. I definitely don't recommend laying the juice on Todorović at all. So, straight pick, I'm just going to go with Pitolo here. I think this fight should be closer to a pick'em. And in the next fight, we have Brendan Allen versus Chris Curtis. And Allen's the minus 350 favorite. Come back on Curtis is plus 285. And a lot of change-ups on this fight. I believe Allen was supposed to fight Tavares. And then Tavares pulls out and Delidzie steps in. Delidzie pulls out of that fight. And then now Chris Curtis steps in. So I think this is the second opponent change that, or third opponent change, right, that Allen's had. And I was actually all over Allen against Delidzie. I felt that was a very good stylistic matchup for him. Was about to drop the hammer on him, but, Delidzie pulls out and in steps Curtis. So we'll take a look at Curtis first. Most recently coming off of a win against Haas. Curtis does have pretty solid boxing. Honestly thought he'd be the better boxer going into the Haas fight, but Haas was actually the one piecing Curtis up until Curtis just lands one flush on the chin of Haas, which, was a little surprising, but not really because Haas just has a glass chin. But overall, Curtis is someone who will look to stay in your face, look to box with you, put combinations together well. Defensive grappling, not that great, like I said in the previous breakdown for him, he was taken down and controlled kind of at will against Kabulaev Magomed Karimov, in the PFL. And really that's all the grappling tape we had of him. And, I figured Haas would maybe go to the wrestling a bit there. Didn't really have an opportunity, but I do think that in this matchup, it's going to be a bit tougher for Curtis, especially if Allen goes to the wrestling, the grappling. But I don't even know if Allen really needs to. Allen, he's a very well-rounded prospect. He is primarily a grappler, but I do think that the offensive striking of Allen's come along quite well. He looked good in his fight against Soriano. He showed he's got good hands, but, he is still very hittable, which was definitely the concern going into that fight and definitely is still a concern going into this fight. While Allen, he's super tough, super durable in there. He is someone who does seem to take a lot of damage. One of these guys who just blocks punches with his face. And that definitely is a concern going into this fight against Curtis, who I think is a pretty solid boxer. And, you don't want to be taking too much damage against someone like Haas, especially in these firefights. And, Allen is someone who I don't think has the best fight IQ in there. He came in against Sean Strickland, was a bit outgunned on the feet, and didn't decide to shoot a takedown. Didn't really get the fight to the ground where, he would have had a pretty sizable advantage. Instead, just decided to stand and bang with Strickland and ended up taking way too much damage that fight. But I do feel that this is a very winnable fight for Allen here. I think if he's able to mix in the grappling, he should be able to have a pretty easy time against Curtis. I think on the feet, Curtis should have the advantage, but, seeing Haas just completely outbox Curtis that first round was very concerning. I think that the volume and the pace that Allen brings on the feet could definitely give Curtis some issues. And unlike Haas, Allen's chin is fucking cast iron. So if Haas isn't able to land that shot on Allen, I do think that Allen could give a lot of trouble to Curtis on the feet. But I think the smart thing for Allen to do really is to mix in the takedowns, get a bit of control time, and possibly find the sub, because I do think that on the ground, Allen does have a massive advantage there. And then on the feet, while I do think Curtis might be the better, technical boxer in there, I think that the durability, the pace, and the pressure of Allen could give Curtis issues. So I gotta favor Allen in here. He's the one who's had a training camp here. Curtis stepping in short notice, pretty quick turnaround. So not sure how he's gonna look. And especially if Allen decides to go to the wrestling and the grappling, this could be a very tough fight for Curtis. So I got to go with Allen here. I think he could get it done by decision, but I wouldn't be surprised if he found the submission. It's just that Allen's not exactly the most reliable to shoot the takedowns, work the grappling. But regardless, I do think that Allen should get it done, either by submission or decision. And moving along, we have Jimmy Crute versus Jamahal Hill, and Crute's the -180 favorite. Come back on Crute is +155. So very interesting matchup here. We have your typical striker versus grappler matchup. We'll take a look at the grappler in Crute first. Very good wrestling, very good timing, very explosive with his takedowns. Just overall a very strong ground game. Crute, he is very aggressive on top. Maybe a little too aggressive, because I definitely have seen him get a little overzealous, lose position on top just because, he gets a little aggressive, swinging a little wild on top and losing position. So I do feel he could shore that up a little bit, maybe be a little more measured in there, maybe just focus a little more on positional control as opposed to just laying the ground and pound. So hopefully he's shored that up a little bit. But he's also got a very good submission game as well. He is someone who will look for submissions, look for ground and pound to soften his opponents up, and then hunt submissions from there. And Crute's also shown pretty good cardio. He's shown that he could, grapple pretty hard for 3 rounds. So I do like that. Hate to see a wrestler, grappler, only be able to go hard for about like a round and a half before just completely falling off. So good to see Crute be able to go for 3 hard rounds going to his wrestling. His striking, a little basic though, just very meat and potatoes, nothing special. Shouldn't really look to strike in this matchup, because I do feel that Hill will be the much better striker in there. I think that Crute might just have a bit more raw power on the feet, but Hill's got very fast hands, very dynamic striking, and even though I don't think he's got big power, he's got good timing, good accuracy, so I do have to be careful on the feet with Hill. And outside of that, he does have a pretty good kicking game as well, and he does have a pretty dangerous knee up the middle. So Crute's going to have to watch out for that as he's looking to shoot the takedowns. And then as far as the cardio goes, I do think that Hill's got decent cardio. I think he's only been to decision once, and he did drop that last round, but I don't think he's someone who is going to be huffing and puffing come that round 3. So I do think this is a very interesting matchup in that regards. Obviously, the question really is going to be if Hill's going to be able to keep the fight standing long enough to win a decision here or even get the knockout. And, I'm going to lean towards no. I do think that Crute should be able to do enough with the grappling to get it done, either, by decision or maybe get the finish on top. Hill's takedown defense isn't particularly great, and I do feel that Crute is probably going to be the best wrestler that Hill's fought. He did go up against Stosic, which, Stosic was able to get a few takedowns on Hill, but I don't think that Stosic is that good of a grappler, and that was just a really weird fight overall. I think that if Crute is able to take Hill down, he could have a decent amount of success. I could see him doing a bit of damage on top, potentially finding the submission. Hill is coming off of a very nasty submission loss to Paul Gregg, where I think he might have broken his arm or something, or might have gotten dislocated. It looked pretty bad, but did not like what I saw in regards to his submission defense. Granted, it was against Paul Craig, very high level, very crafty submission guy in there. And honestly, I'm just not too keen on picking the guy who literally just had his arm snapped and is now going up against another really solid grappler in Crute. So I think Crute should be able to get it done. Crute is pretty reliable to go to his wrestling, and he is coming off of a loss where he spent a little too long on the feet. So I do think that coming into this fight, he'll probably go back to what gave him so much success so far. So I do think that we see a Crute come in with a much more aggressive, wrestle-heavy game plan. And I do think that if he's able to take Hill down, control him a bit in that first round, it'll kind of soften up some of the shots coming his way. So I think that Crute should be able to win at least 2 out of the 3 rounds with his wrestling, with his grappling. And I wouldn't be surprised if Crute was able to either get like a submission or maybe even like a ground and pound sort of TKO. So yeah, I got Crute here, but I don't know if I really want to lay the juice on him. He's going to be pretty outgunned on the feet. If Hill is able to somehow stuff the takedowns or work his way back up, he could do a bit of damage to Crute. I just think that there is a pretty sizable a pretty sizable gap on the feet. Granted, I do think there's a pretty sizable gap on the ground as well, but I do see a path to victory here for Hill, and I just don't quite trust the stand-up of Crute at this point to lay the juice on him, but I do think he should win with his wrestling here. And moving right along, we have an old man fight between Clay Guida and Leonardo Santos. Santos is the minus 185 favorite. Comeback on Guida is plus 160. Very interesting matchup, but we'll take a look at Guida first. So Guida, very frantic fighter in there. Lots of movement on the feet. He's always working, always throwing. Doesn't look like he's landing too much, and it does look like he is somewhat pillow-fisted, but from an optic standpoint, it does look like he's got the higher work rate a lot of the time. He does a decent job of mixing in the takedowns as well. The guy does have a wrestling base, and really I think it's his takedowns that usually win him the fight. He's able to keep it competitive on the feet, and then is able to time a level change and get enough control time to usually win rounds that way. His cardio is on point. He's able to do it for 3 solid rounds. Doesn't seem to really slow down, so that's good for him. Durability seems fine as well. The big issue that I do have with him is probably the submission defense. The guy's got a penchant for just sticking his neck into guillotines, so definitely going to have to be careful this fight, especially since he's going up against Santos, who is a pretty dangerous submission artist. Not sure how his guillotine game looks, but he's going to be the bigger, longer fighter in there, so there are going to be opportunities for Santos to snatch up the neck if Guida is not careful in there. But as far as the other things that Santos does bring to the table, he's got decent striking, he's got good power, decent accuracy. Not the most layered striker in there, but he does have a nice one too, dangerous cross. And of course, the guy's got a very high-level jiu-jitsu background. His cardio is definitely a concern, though. He is someone who I would consider more of an explosive fighter. If he isn't getting you out of there early, he does tend to struggle a bit as the fight gets stretched out. Earlier in his career, he's been getting a lot of early finishes, so those aren't things you notice as much. But more recently, when he's come back, he's definitely looked like he's slowed down quite a bit. His fight against Bogatov was a fight where both guys were slowing down immensely, and that was a fight that was filled with breaks. Plenty of eye pokes, plenty of nut shots, so lots of opportunities for both guys to rest up, and both guys still ended up gassing out pretty hard. So cardio definitely a pretty big concern here for Santos, but outside of that, I do think he's a pretty solid fighter. But taking a look at this matchup, I do have to maybe favor the power of Santos a bit more. Obviously the jiu-jitsu, but where it gets real interesting is how this fight's going to look. Should it get dragged out? I do like the volume, the pace, and the pressure of Guida. He is someone who I think that if this fight does go to a decision, has a decent chance of winning. Optic-wise, Guida is honestly kind of a weasel with the way, he throws his output, makes it look like he's landing and doing a lot more than he is. And then Guida does also have the wrestling to fall back to if he needs to get a bit of control time to close out rounds that way. The real concern, though, for Guida is going to be if he's going to get caught in that guillotine. That's legit my biggest concern. I don't know if Santos is going to be able to knock Guida out on the feet. Guida, again, lots of movement in there. I think it's going to be a little harder for Santos to get his timing down. It's going to be a little harder for him to maybe line up that cross that he likes to throw. So, if he's not knocking Guida out, I think Santos's best path to victory then would probably be to catch Guida in a guillotine, which, I think definitely is live, but I just don't think that it's super high percentage. And, on the feet, it'll be interesting, honestly. I do favor the volume of Guida, but, he's going to be the much smaller fighter. It's going to be interesting to see him, close the distance. Santos, I think, is going to have a pretty sizable height and reach advantage over Guida, so how it plays out on the feet is going to be interesting, and how this fight is going to look in rounds 2 and 3 is going to be interesting as well. Really, I think it'll kind of depend on the type of fight that Guida is going to bring. If this is just going to be like a ranged kickboxing match, I don't know if Santos is going to be slowing down too much. I do think that Guida is probably going to have to mix in the wrestling a bit to really make Santos work, and I think that if he does that and stays safe, I do think that Guida could probably steal rounds 2 and 3. So for that reason, I think I'm actually going to go with Guida here with this pick. I know it's a little dangerous. Guida historically has been extremely susceptible to the guillotine, so it's a very legit concern in this fight. but I'm going to go with Guida. I think that if he's able to stay safe, he should be able to outwork Santos and win a 29-28 decision. So the pick for me is Guida, and Guida at plus 160 I think's got decent value, or maybe even Guida by decision. But at plus 160, I think the odds are pretty good there. So I'm going to go with Guida. I'll take him to win via 29-28 decision. And in the co-main event, we have Brad Riddell versus Rafael Fiziev. And this is probably the main event for a lot of people. The fight is lined at a pick'em. Two very explosive strikers, two very fun prospects to watch. Both guys very technical in there, both very high-level strikers. So should be a fun one. Should be a very contested fight as well. I think we'll have some very strong opinions on either side. And we'll start with Fiziev first. So like I was saying before, very high-level striker, lots of movement in there. He is the one in this matchup who I do feel will have the more explosive striking. Fiziev, he does load up pretty big on his shots. He's got very lightning fast kicks, lots of zip in his shots. He's got quick hands as well. Just overall, I'd say a very explosive, very dynamic offensive striker. He's shown good takedown defense so far. The only issue I'd say I have with him is that he does slow down a bit, as the fight gets extended. We saw him slow down a bit against his most recent fight, Green, and a little bit against DeCasey as well. So that's definitely a concern. But, that being said, even though he does slow down, he is someone who will kind of fight through the fatigue pretty well. He's still returning fire in those exchanges. Even though, his opponents are touching him up, they're not able to just completely tee off on him. They still do have to respect the power that's coming their way from Fiziev. And honestly, it's not completely surprising since Fiziev does push a pretty high pace, and he is someone who will swing pretty hard in there. So, he's not someone who will just volume you up and throw like punches at 60-70%. He's looking to do damage with everything he throws, and he does throw quite a bit. So, not completely surprised that he does slow down, but I do feel if he maybe paces himself a little better, I do think he can finish the third round a little stronger. But that said, though, he does put on a pretty strong showing in those first two rounds. But taking a look at Riddell now, another very solid technical striker, someone who also likes to throw a lot of kicks. Riddell, I'd say he's a little better with the counter punching. The distance management is good as well from Riddell. Good use of the jab. I'd say Riddell is a little more measured in there. He's definitely someone who is, I'd say, a little more composed. Fiziev can get a little wild in there, can start to kind of wing bombs in there at times, whereas Riddell, I'd say, a little more composed, picks his shots a lot better. And I do feel that Riddell's probably the slightly more well-rounded fighter in there. He has shown a bit of wrestling. In fact, I actually think it was his wrestling that won him his fight against Dober, because I think Dober had Riddell hurt a couple of times on the feet, but ultimately Riddell was able to work the wrestling, get a bit of control time to really close out the rounds and win him the fight. Now, with that being said, though, this was against Dober, who historically has not had great takedown defense. Even outside of the Makhachev fight, Dober's been taken down by other strikers as well. He has been controlled there as well, so I'm not sure if this is a performance that you could take too much from on the Riddell side, and as far as like the grappling and wrestling goes. I don't know if this is really something that Riddell will have a ton of success with against Fiziev. He for sure can mix it in, keep Fiziev thinking here, but I'm just not sure if he's going to have the same amount of wrestling and grappling success against Fiziev as he did against Dober. But taking a look at this matchup, I do feel it should be a pretty close fight. Obviously, two very high-level strikers. I think both guys will have their moments. Should be a pretty back-and-forth sort of fight. But ultimately, I think I am going to have to go with Fiziev here. I think that on the feet, while I do think that both guys are very good strikers, I think that Fiziev is going to be the guy who's throwing a little bit more, throwing a little bit harder. And as far as just the optics of it go, I think that Fiziev is going to be landing the much more eye-catching shots, the much harder shots. And, Fiziev's just the much flashier fighter in there. And, he is someone who I think will hit a bit harder as well. So I do think that the judges will score that a little more in Fiziev's favor, and I do think that Fiziev's got decent enough cardio to do that for 2 rounds. So I do think that Fiziev's got a good chance of winning those first 2 rounds and then and then maybe slowing down a little bit in that third round and dropping that last round. So yeah, I do think that Fiziev should do enough those first 2 rounds to win on the cards. The grappling or the wrestling might be a bit of a factor here, but I do feel that Fiziev's takedown defense should be good enough to keep the fight standing and do enough damage on the feet, again, to win those first 2 rounds. So yeah, I got Fiziev here by decision. Might put a small bet on him. Nothing too crazy because I do think that Riddell is a really solid fighter. And, if the striking exchanges really are, super even and Riddell is able to hit a takedown or 2 at the end of the rounds, he could very well steal the rounds. But ultimately, I do feel that the judges will score the flashy strikes from Fiziev a little more than they do for Riddell. So I got to go Fiziev here, 29-28. And in the main event, we have Rob Font versus José Aldo, and Font's the -138 favorite. Comeback on Aldo is +118. Font taking a decent step up in competition, and Aldo definitely showing that he can still hang with some of the guys in the top 10, top 15. But taking a look at Font first, so the guy's got very crisp striking. He's got a great jab, a great 1-2. He's very technical, very sharp in there. His distance management is solid. He's got good footwork in there. He's got decent volume as well. Not someone I'd consider a heavy hitter by any means, but he is someone who is looking to constantly just work in there, touch up his opponents. But again, I don't think he's got phenomenal power, at least not for a fighter in like the top 10, top 15. He does have a few knockout wins early in his career against I'd say lower level guys. Does have a knockout win over Moraes as well, but you do have to consider this was a Moraes whose chin had been severely diminished at that point. So not sure if you could draw too many conclusions there. But going back to Font here, his takedown defense I don't think is that great. I think opponents have a pretty easy time taking him down. His get-ups are fine, though. He is someone who will fight to get back to his feet. Not someone who, will play off his back for too much. Not sure if this will be too big of a factor here. Aldo historically isn't someone who, worked the grappling too much. I know he took the back of Vera a little while ago, but generally, Aldo isn't someone who is going to be pushing a pretty high grappling pace or anything. But yeah, going on to Aldo, he is someone who will generally look to strike. He's got very heavy hands. More recently, he's kind of developed more of a counter-striking style. He's got some very nice body work, very heavy kicks as well when he does decide to throw it. Hasn't really thrown a lot of leg kicks in recent memory. Not really sure why. I mean, I think some people are saying that, it could be an injury, could be his hips or something, but I'm not too sure. I just have noticed that he will throw some kicks here and there, but it's not really a big part of his game anymore. Even though I do feel that this is a really good matchup for him to really start working the legs of Font, but just not sure if he'll go there. Hasn't really been reliable to go there. But again, with Aldo, he has shown that he could definitely hang with the guys in the top 10, top 15. It's just when he starts to fight, I guess, the more elite level guys that he really starts to struggle a bit. Because you look at some of his losses, right? Like Petr Yan, Volkanovski, Holloway twice, McGregor. So, I did kind of conveniently leave out the Moraes fight there. I do feel it was a very close fight, a fight that he arguably could have won. And, in hindsight, that fight hasn't aged particularly well, especially with how Moraes has been performing. But, this was a Moraes that still had his chin intact at the moment, I think. So, this was before his just slew of finishes. So, I do think that, all things considered, it wasn't too bad of a fight. It's just kind of hasn't aged all that well considering, Moraes has been finished 3 times since. So, back to Aldo, though. My point being about Aldo that, he still fights pretty competitively with guys who are, top 10 level, like Pedro Munoz, Marlon Vera, even, Moicano and Stevens a couple years ago. But it just seems that against elite level guys, he's just not quite on that level anymore. So definitely makes it a little difficult to really get a gauge on where Aldo is in his career because, again, you look at his losses, just the guys who are at the top of their division, either champs or former champs, with the exception of Moraes, obviously. But, Moraes at one point was a title challenger. And, until his most recent losses, the guys was, I'd say, a top fighter. So, Aldo definitely was keeping it competitive in there. And Font is someone who I think is a really good fighter, but, I really don't think he's that good. And I don't know if Font is really just one of these elite level guys, right? But, you do have to consider the fact that the last few 5-rounders that Aldo's been in, he's struggled quite a bit. Obviously, very high level guys he's going up against, but you do have to wonder, at this stage in his career, all the damage he's taken, and the fact that I feel Aldo's cardio's not that great. How he's going to look once, rounds 4 and 5 rolling around. Font, again, not a very heavy hitter, not the same sort of striker as, Jan or even Holloway, but, he is someone who will bring the volume. And he does push a pretty solid pace. He was doing a bit of work on Garbrandt in his most recent fight. And, you do have to wonder, come the 4th and 5th rounds, how the cardio of Aldo's looking, if he's going to be able to take the sustained punishment, and if Aldo's going to be able to do enough those first 3 rounds to win it on the scorecards there, because I do have a feeling that, Aldo's probably going to drop those latter 2 rounds as he starts to slow down a bit. So, yeah, this is such a tough fight, honestly, because I do feel that Aldo's still good enough to keep it competitive. It's just if the wheels will start to fall off as the fight gets extended. And, earlier in the week, the line was a bit wider. I do remember Font being at around like minus 170 or so. And at that point, I felt that maybe the value was on Aldo. But as it stands now, I do think that it's about right, because I do think that Font should be the slight favorite here. I think that Font should be able to win those last 2 rounds. So what it'll come down to are the first 3 rounds. If Font is able to take one of those rounds from Aldo, or if Aldo is able to have a really strong start and then kind of just coast a little bit as the fight gets extended. And pre-tape, I was pretty high on Font. I was much more leaning on the Font side. Thinking that he should be a decent sized favorite here, but. After doing the tape, I just felt that the advantages that I thought Font had going into this fight would be a little bit bigger, namely the size and the age advantage. But as it turns out, Font has only got about an inch in height and reach over Aldo. Aldo's actually a pretty damn big bantamweight, all things considered. We're so used to seeing Aldo up in at featherweight that we forget how fucking massive he is actually at bantamweight. But yeah, not as big of a size advantage as I thought that Font would have. And then the age and the youth advantage, right? I thought that Font, he was much younger, man, but it turns out the guy's like 34, so he's only about a year younger than Aldo. And Aldo definitely has a lot more wear and tear on his body. In terms of fight years, Aldo definitely is older, but biologically they're pretty damn close. And I thought that would be a big issue here, but I do feel that the experience of Aldo is definitely going to be able to overcome a bit of that there, because again, Aldo's been in there with some of the best guys. He's really only lost to some of the best guys in there, championship caliber fighters, whereas with Font, I feel he is more or less just like a fringe, like top 5, maybe top 10 sort of guy. I don't think he's championship caliber, and honestly, I do feel he's a little one-dimensional with his boxing. So with all that being said, I do think I still will have to go with Font here. He's shown that he could go 5 rounds against Garbrandt, pretty damn well. I think that, as the fight gets extended, it'll definitely start to favor Font a bit more. But, I do think that Aldo is still good enough to have a very competitive, 3 or 4 rounds. And I forgot to mention this a little earlier, but I do feel that Font struggles against guys who are, I'd say, heavier hitters, guys who will get in his face and throw down with him. He struggled against guys like Lineker, Munoz, Assunção, all guys who I'd say are pretty heavy hitters, guys who aren't afraid to get in your face and bring the heat. And I do feel that Aldo is that sort of fighter. So I definitely do feel that Aldo is live in this matchup. I just can't shake the feeling of him potentially just kind of falling off in the later rounds, which is really keeping me from really betting him. And the fact that the line's kind of closed up a bit. I do feel that at plus 140, he was definitely the value side. But as it stands now, I don't see too much value on either side. But I do think I'm going to have to go with Font here. I do think that he'll win the latter 2 rounds. I think he'll probably be able to steal maybe the 2nd or 3rd round or something. But I definitely do think that Aldo can make it close. But my official pick is going to be Font here. I do think he wins a very close 48-47 decision.